Hello, welcome to the Aurora Veritatis channel. Today, we are going to learn about an example of integrity, courage, and faith. St. Thomas More, the English martyr who preferred to lose his own life rather than betray his conscience. Have you ever imagined what you would do if you had to choose between pleasing the king or remaining faithful to God? Stay with me until the end of this video and find out why Thomas More is known as the man who did not sell his soul, and what his life has to teach us. Thomas More was born in London in the year 1478 into a family of lawyers. From an early age, he stood out for his intelligence and deep sense of justice. His education was marked not only by the study of laws, but also by an intense spiritual life. He frequented the Franciscans in Greenwich and for a while lived in the London Charterhouse, where he sought to discern his vocation. But it was in marriage that he found his path. He married Jane Colt, with whom he had 4 children, and after becoming a widower, he married again with Alice Middleton. As a husband and father, Thomas dedicated himself body and soul to the intellectual and religious education of his children. His home was known for being a place of culture, joy, and profound charity, always open to friends and those in need. Thomas was famed as an upright, jovial man and a fair and admired judge throughout Europe. Not by chance, Erasmus of Rotterdam, a great Renaissance thinker, dedicated his work in praise of folly to him. Thomas was esteemed for his sharp intelligence and sense of humor, virtues that shone through both in his life and in his writings. But above all, he was a man of unwavering faith. In public life, Thomas More shone like few others. He entered Parliament, held significant diplomatic positions, and in 1516 wrote his most famous work, Utopia, a book that remains a reference in studies on political philosophy and society to this day. Later, he was appointed judge and ascended to the presidency of the communal chamber. His rise was meteoric. He became an advisor and secretary to King Henry VIII and participated in the drafting of the work, The Defense of the Seven Sacraments, which earned Henry the title of Defender of the Faith granted by the Pope. In 1529, he reached the pinnacle of his career when he was appointed Lord Chancellor of England, the first layman to hold this position. But Thomas's life was about to change dramatically. Amid the moral crisis enveloping the crown, Henry VIII was seeking the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, for he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. The Pope, faithful to the doctrine of Christ, denied Henry's request. Faced with the refusal, the king broke with Rome, self-proclaimed himself head of the church in England, and demanded that all subjects swear loyalty to him as the supreme leader of the church, an act that deeply wounded the Catholic conscience and faith. Thomas More, foreseeing the spiritual and social disaster that was looming, resigned from his position as Lord Chancellor in 1532. He chose silence and seclusion, distancing himself from politics and accepting a life of poverty and abandonment alongside his family. But Thomas's silence spoke too loudly for the king. His refusal to condone Henry VIII's adultery and to swear allegiance to the king as head of the church was seen as high treason. In 1534, with the enactment of the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Succession, which demanded the recognition of the king's religious authority, Thomas More was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Even under pressure, he refused to yield. His conduct of silence, dignified and respectful, was not enough to save him. During his trial, he made a brilliant defense about the indissolubility of marriage, the importance of the legal heritage inspired by Christian values, and the freedom of the church in relation to the state. Therefore, he was sentenced to death for high treason. On July 6, 1535, Thomas More was beheaded. His last words encapsulate his entire life and faith. First die as a good servant of the king, but first and foremost as a servant of God. Days later, his great friend, Bishop John Fisher, was also executed for remaining faithful to the Church of Christ. For this reason, both are celebrated together by the Catholic liturgy on June 22nd. If you're finding the story of Thomas More inspiring up to this point, hit the like button. This way, our channel will get more exposure, and this message can reach more people who are seeking examples of faith and courage. The martyrdom of Thomas More reminds us in some ways of the story of Saint John the Baptist. Both were killed for refusing to condone the injustice and sin of the powerful of their time. John the Baptist rebuked Herod for his adultery and had his head delivered on a platter. Thomas More, in turn, refused to legitimize the adultery of King Henry VIII and to break with the Church of Rome, paying with his own life for his fidelity to the truth. It is important to note that, unlike the martyrs of the first centuries who died for refusing to worship the emperor, John the Baptist and Thomas More were killed not for their words, but for their deeds, for defending the truth, for not bending to sin. As St. Thomas Aquinas says, it is not only the confession of faith in words that can lead to martyrdom, but every virtuous action done for the love of God, especially when it involves renunciation and suffering. The life of Thomas More offers two great lessons for us, 21st century Christians. The first is the non-negotiable value of truth. Thomas did not fear sacrificing his own existence to remain faithful to the gospel. In an era marked by relativism and moral decay, your example challenges each of us to courageously and fearlessly preserve all the truths of our faith, especially those related to family and marriage, which are not mere human opinions but divine words. As Pope Benedict XVI reminds us, only in truth does charity shine and can be authentically lived. There is no true charity without truth. The defense of family, fidelity, and justice cannot be adapted according to the interests of the moment or the pressures of power. For Thomas More, human laws cannot override God's laws. The second great lesson is about the limits of civil authorities' power. He bore witness, even unto the shedding of blood, to the primacy of truth over power. His example is a beacon for us all. When Caesar, Herod, Henry VIII, or any authority seeks to usurp the place of God, it is the Christian's duty to obey God rather than men. As the scripture teaches, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's, and also, we must obey God rather than men. History is clear. When the state becomes the measure of all things, when civil power places itself above divine law, sooner or later, tyranny sets in. It was like this in the England of Henry VIII. It was like this in totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, and it will always be like this where man tries to take the place of God. He was canonized in 1935 by Pope Pius XI, recognized as a martyr of conscience and patron of rulers and politicians. He teaches us that it is possible to be a layman, husband, father, friend, competent professional, and at the same time a saint. His life shows that holiness is not incompatible with public life or the exercise of power, as long as it is always subordinate to truth and justice. As we celebrate the memory of St. Thomas More, we are invited to examine our own fidelity to truth, faith, and our conscience. Do we, in the face of the world's pressures, have the courage to choose to serve God before pleasing men? Are we willing to defend the truth, even if it costs us some comfort, position, or even friendships? Thomas's life challenges us to be upright, fair, and courageous, even when this puts us on a collision course with the spirit of the time. First, invite you to subscribe to the Aurora Veritatis channel so you don't miss any content about the lives of the saints and the great treasures of the Catholic faith. May God bless your life and see you in the next video.